Hello, welcome back to chapter 4 of the book review. This time I've already read whole of chapter 4 and I will go through the discussed points from memory. That's why it might not be very accurate, but it's impossible to be accurate anyway, due to the interpretability of language, as we will learn in the video. And I will just go through the points as what I can remember and how I interpreted them. So we will go through the list. It's eight points were discussed. So we start with the first one, where they talked about the difference between being, knowledge, and understanding. So the concept is that a person can develop along two lines. It can develop along the path of knowledge and above on the path of being. And only if both are developed at the same time can understanding occur in a person. So if one were to develop their knowledge very far and the being lags behind, the person couldn't make any sense of his acquired knowledge. On the other hand, if the person has developed their being very far, can do much things, but is missing the knowledge, then he will too can't make proper use of the power of his being, basically, and he acts still mechanically. So they have to develop at the same time, such that the acquired knowledge can be understood. Yeah, I think it's, if someone reads, okay, I think this needs no further explanation. Second point was that language is imprecise and interpretable. So if someone says anything, he has a certain understanding of the concept he's trying to explain. But the person hearing it hears exactly the same words as the person speaks, but a different concept will come up for him as he hears it. Based on their current understanding, even though the words are exactly the same. So how can we, what can we do about that? So first of all, it's good when we become aware of this fact. We shouldn't take anything literally what a person say, but we should try to understand what they meant, to what they wanted to say. I think this is a good tip here. And I've come up with the idea of language having three different qualities, which only you can have at most two of them at the same time. So we have expressibility, we have precision, and third one we have feasibility, or required processing power to make use of it. So, for example, in everyday language we have very high expressibility. We can express anything which comes to our mind. And we have a good deal of feasibility, so we can use it to communicate in a reasonable amount of time. It's good enough for everyday life, but this goes at the cost of precision. So precision is very poor in everyday language. On the other hand, we have logic and languages of logic and mathematics, for example, which have very high precision and also a good feasibility in their domain. But the problem is that they lack expressibility. For example, it can be very difficult to explain a concept of God in propositional logic, for example, or in mathematical equations. So, language, we already always have a trade-off between these three qualities. So that's the second concept. Third concept was that G proposed so the teacher in the book proposed to base language, so everyday language, on a central concept. And this concept is the concept of evolution. Evolution, refer back to video 3, chapter 3, for the definition of evolution. And he says that every word must be understood in 7 levels of evolution. So for example, when we take the word man, there is man number 1, man number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. And each one is on a different level of evolution. So the first 3 levels are on the same level, and they were: number 1 is the physical, predominantly physically acting man. Number 2 is the predominantly emotional acting man. And number 3 is the predominantly intellectually acting man. The intellectual one is easy, and what's important here is to note that these are not developed, but men are already born in one of the 3 categories. Only level 4 and above are developed deliberately later in life. So number 3, the intellectual one, tries to understand everything through intellect And for the emotional one, it's also more or less clear, but the physical one I couldn't make sense of. So we'll leave it at that. So then we covered number 1 to 3, and number 4 is where unity occurs, because we already learned that every being, every human has multiple personalities in them, each one referring to themselves as I. And with level 4 we achieved unity. So there's only one personality left. There cannot be a personality which knows something which the next personality doesn't remember or has nothing to do with. So that means that the person has become much more consistent on level 4. And level 5 is when crystallization happens. We already talked about that earlier. Level 6 is when a human is already complete. It has all the properties that it wants, but they are not yet permanent. That means they can still be taken away. And level 7 finally is when the properties have become permanent. So now we only talked about the 7 levels, for the example of man or human. But he said that every word must be seen in those 7 levels. But I'm not sure if that makes sense for me. I mean, for men, I can agree with that, but for the word, I mean, also for the word art or book, it makes sense for me. I mean, book, we can just say that book of level 4 was written by being of level 4, consciousness of level 4. Book of level 2, so an emotional one, maybe a piece of poetry was written by man of number 2, and so on. So same with art and music and all which can be produced. But there are some words where I don't know how that can be applied, but let's leave it at that for now. So fifth concept. So by the way, this was now the 3rd and the 4th concept. So the 3rd was he suggested that language is based around a central concept, namely evolution, and then I already explained evolution on the 7 levels, being the 4th concept, and now we come to the 5th, which is studying the world and studying oneself. And here it says basically that you can only understand yourself if you understand the world, and vice versa. And by learning, when you, for example, have trouble understanding concept of yourself, of the working of your being, you can look at the world and by that understand how it works, if you have trouble understanding it directly, and vice versa. So that's concept 5. Then concept 6, they talked about the different worlds. So G stated that there is a fundamental erroneous assumption we make, and that is that we all live in the same world, when in reality we all live in different worlds influencing each other. That means every human lives in their own world, every planet lives in their own world, and every sun lives in their own world, every galaxy, and so forth. And here we have the levels again, and the concept that every being can direct their own experience, but only in the confines of what the world of the higher being, its higher being, allows. So for example, the world of a plant. Let's take the world of a plant for example, which is in turn its higher being is the world of the planet and the world of the sun. So the plant might say, I'm free to do anything. I now decide to grow twice as fast. And it can do that, but it will not be in accordance with what the higher beings intend for the plant. So the higher beings, being let's say nature and the sun, give it a certain amount of light and water, which supports specifically a certain kind of growth. And if the plant were to decide, I'm growing now twice as fast as my higher beings intended, then it were to die, because it doesn't get enough sun or it doesn't get enough water to support that growth. And the same applies to every being. Human is free to act in the confines of its higher beings. So this was concept 6. And concept 7, they were talking about 3 forces which lead to creation or manifestation, and there is an active, a passive force, which are the commonly known, and the third one, the neutralizing one. And let's take a concrete example. Let's take the concrete example of making videos on YouTube. The active force, so in my case, the active force is I'm motivated, I'm inspired to do it, to produce videos. The negative, the passive force is working against the active one, which is my inertia, my doubts, my fears, etc. So the active and the passive work against each other, and whichever is stronger will determine my actions, so if I do a video or not. And if one of them becomes, so the ideal picture is that, that's actually not true. The ideal picture is that they are in balance, in harmony, so they are equally strong. Because if the active one is too strong, I will be very enthusiastically for a short time and then burn out. But if the passive one is too strong, I won't do anything at all. So only if they are in balance, that means there is a drive to do it, but on the other hand, the counterbalancing resistance of a bit against it, then it's healthy. And the third one is the neutralizing one, and this is the lesser known one, but as I've understood it, this is basically, so this force is used to either enforce or inhibit the active and the passive, or both, to balance them out. And it's not, I think, exactly described how this third one is working, but for me, again, it would make sense that reason can be this third force. So, for example, if my passive force becomes too strong, that is, I am too concerned about what people might say, etc., of my videos, I can use my logical mind to counterbalance this force by saying, yeah, if it's not perfect, the video, you can do nothing about it, but you can only improve if you do them, and that will result in my passive force becoming weaker and my active becoming stronger, to the point where I'm able to produce another video. So this was principle 7, and now the final one, number 8. I didn't understand it quite well, but what I understood was that, so those three forces we just talked about, every world introduces, beginning from the absolute or the layers down, its own three forces, and is influenced by all of the forces above it, but is most strongly influenced by the forces closer to it and less influenced by the forces farther away from it. And he said that humans, or the plane of humans, is already influenced by, I think, 48 forces, so very many forces compared to the absolute. The absolute is only one force, and I don't know, the sun, maybe 9 or 18 forces, the world of the sun, I mean, and so on. So I don't know what to make of that yet, but let's just consider it and leave it at that. So those were quickly the 8 topics they touched upon in chapter 4, or at any rate what I remembered or how I interpreted them. So that's it for this video, and see you again for chapter 5 in the next video.